As always, your friendly chairman, Kumar Barve. I'm joined by the equally friendly Dana Stein and the other. I'm trying to think of something funny, and it's just not coming to me right now. Yeah, the band of merry misfits, right? Yeah. Of the Environment and Transportation Committee. And today we're going to have a briefing from first the new Secretary and the Department of Environment, and also then the Maryland Climate Change Commission. So why don't I just begin by, thank you very much. Why don't I just begin with Serena McIlwain? Is that how I pronounce your name?
Yes.
Okay.
You got it.
I didn't screw it up.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, Chair Barve and Vice Chair Stein, and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. I am Serena, I'm the Secretary Designee, Serena McIlwain, and I thank you very much for this opportunity to allow me and my colleagues to give you an overview of the department. The mission of the Maryland Department of the Environment is to protect and restore the environment for the health and well-being of all Marylanders. The overview that you're going to get today from my staff will provide just a glimpse of the authority and structure of our department. And though I just joined the agency, I'm so excited and energized with the passion and commitment that I see from our staff here at the department. Already this weekend, I've watched our staff work together through the entire weekend, and I was working with them, just listening to all the collaboration that went on to ensure that a rural community had safe water. And I've seen our staff push through those issues this weekend, working in strong partnerships to solve some environmental problems so quickly. I look forward to meeting each of you and working together to ensure we have the best environment for Marylanders. My priorities include working in partnership to build environmental infrastructure, starting with communities that are impacted by environmental justice concerns. And I say it all the time, but we have to work together in partnership as this changing climate happens around us, and it's our goal to leave no one behind. I'm committed to working in partnership also for a healthy Chesapeake. We have had hard challenges ahead of us, but every day I meet people in the governor's office, within our department at MDE, and now with the legislator. And we share a commitment to keep Maryland leading the nation with policies that build healthy and vibrant and sustainable communities. With me today, we have Deputy Secretary Suzanne Dorsey. She's going to provide the overview of MDE. Chris Hoagland, the Director of the Air and Radiation Administration. We have Tyler Abbott behind me. He's the Director of Land and Materials Administration, and Lee Curry, he's the Director of the Water and Science Administration. And so now I'm going to turn it over to you to give the overview. Thank you.
Welcome, Suzanne. Take it away.
Thank you, Chair. Suzanne Dorsey, Deputy Secretary of the Maryland Department of the Environment. So we're so pleased to be with you today to represent over 800, close to 900 members, colleagues of the Maryland Department of the Environment. These are dedicated public servants who really take to heart the mission of protecting the environment for the health and well-being of all Marylanders. As members of the MDE staff, we serve on 64 boards and commissions across the state and the nation, including a global commission on ocean acidification. We administer 350 types of different permits in our department, and we have, you may not know, an emergency response division. So these are folks that are on call 24/7. They respond to environmental emergencies, including tanker truck overturns, spills, emissions, toxic waste, hazardous materials. In 1 year, just as an example, the team responded to over 435 different incidents across our state. We have important priorities, important work to do at the Maryland Department of the Environment, and I want to start with a directive from Secretary McElwain, which is enforcement. We have an absolute commitment to enforcement in the Maryland Department of the Environment under Secretary McElwain's direction. And at the top of the list, along with enforcement, is environmental justice. We incorporate environmental justice across all of our work at the department, and we're proud of our record, even as we know we have more important work to do. We have an environmental justice screen. We have a variety of tools that our colleagues are putting into action right now to address and redress historic and systemic racism across our great state. We are prioritizing climate change. We want to build equitable communities that are built on green and blue infrastructure. We expect the future to be challenging, and we also know that we are up to meeting that challenge. You can't be a Marylander without being committed to Chesapeake Bay restoration, and we are determined to achieve our 2025 TMDL goal and go beyond that by including climate change in our Chesapeake Bay restoration program. We protect the state's air, land, and water resources, and we respond to the needs of all Maryland citizens and residents. There are 3 regulatory administrations within MDE, the Air and Radiation Administration, and you're going to hear a brief synopsis from the directors, Land and Material, and Water and Science. We also, I think it's really important for everyone to know that we are dependent on our support programs in our Operational Services Administration and our Budget and Infrastructure. We could not do our job protecting your land, air, and water without support from our administrational support organizations. We are located, headquartered in Montgomery Park in Baltimore City, but we do have field offices across the state that have full-time members of our team working there to different ends. So with that, I want to absolutely leave time for our directors to brag a little bit about what their different administrations do. And so I'd like to turn it over to Director Chris Hoagland.
Before we go to Chris, just as a setting of the stage, obviously, Madam Secretary, this is an introduction of my committee and you, and I just want to tell you a little bit about me. I've, as many of you know, I'm the Chief Financial Officer of an environmental hazardous waste disposal company in Rockville, and I see the Secretary's signature on all of the waste destruction sheets that run through our system, and we don't do, 95% of our business is with the private sector. We don't do a lot of pickups for state or local government, but we interface frequently with them, and we have always had a very good working relationship with the Maryland Department of the Environment. And I'll also say, and I don't mean this as a criticism of anyone, this agency, along with the DNR and many others, have been understaffed for a very long time, and not just during the Hogan administration. Really, the understaffing really began to occur after and during the Great Recession. So this is, in many ways, the last 2 governors of the state of Maryland weren't in a position to staff up the your agency and many of the other agencies. So I know that as members of my committee will ask questions, which I'm sure they will, of you and your deputies, it's within that sort of a context that our viewpoint is going to be animated. And so after having said that, let me just go right to Chris Hoagland. So Chris, welcome to the Environment and Transportation Committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Chris Hoagland, I'm the Director of the Air and Radiation Administration within MDE. The Air and Radiation Administration, or ARA, we have 4 core functions. The first is that we administer the Federal Clean Air Act in Maryland. We regulate air pollution sources, we reduce air pollution, improve air quality to meet federal air quality standards. Our second core function is around climate change. In addition to our direct role in addressing climate change as the air regulators in reducing greenhouse gases, the air pollutants that cause climate change. We also have a central coordinating role within the state. We write the state climate change plans, and we support the state's commission on climate change, which we'll be talking about during the next session. Another core function is that we are the Air and Radiation Administration, so we also regulate sources of radiation in the state. This is primarily medical, scientific, industrial equipment. X-ray machines are the largest example to ensure that the materials are being, and the machines are being handled properly to avoid exposure to radiation. And then we also have a role in regulating asbestos. We oversee asbestos remediation projects. We oversee the workers and contractors who perform those projects. Next slide. A little bit about ARA's organization. We have 8 programs related to air quality. We establish the permits for air pollution sources. We enforce those permits. We maintain an statewide air quality monitoring network, et cetera. We have the climate change program, which performs the climate change functions I described earlier, regulating greenhouse gases and also establishing statewide plans to achieve our statutory greenhouse gas reduction targets. And then we also have a program, radiological health program, that performs the radiation administration functions I described. And then we have a program for internal operations as well. So next slide, just some recent highlights, some accomplishments. The first is that the state achieved its 2020 greenhouse gas reduction goal. Maryland, as we'll talk about later, has had goals established in state law surrounding climate change for a very long time. We've been doing this longer than most other states, almost any other state. And our original climate change laws set what was then a very ambitious goal to reduce statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2020. And the state achieved approximately 30% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions by 2020, substantially.
And unfortunately, the reporter left just as you were bragging about the fact that, oh, there he is, Josh Kurtz. I want to make sure you know that the greenhouse gas goal was for a reduction of 25%, but the state of Maryland has achieved 30%. So I want to see that in Maryland Matters.
Thank you. Look forward to reading that. Another one is that as of last year, Maryland is measuring attainment, statewide attainment of all federal national ambient air quality standards. That's for the first time since the Clean Air Act was passed. That's decades of work went into that. Maryland used to have some of the worst air quality on the East Coast. And as of last year, we are now meeting all of the federal national ambient air quality standards in every part of the state. The job is obviously not finished. That's not good enough. We need to do better than that. In particular, we need to ensure that all communities in Maryland are equitably sharing in the benefits of clean air. And there's an enormous amount of work still to be done there. We also were tasked with a coordinating role in the Tree Solutions Now Act a couple of years ago, the statewide efforts to plant 5 million additional trees, and we recently issued a plan in partnership with many other organizations to achieve that. And then I mentioned environmental justice a moment ago. We've recently launched community partnerships with overburdened communities, where we are devoting substantial resources to particular communities that are overburdened by air pollution, facing environmental injustice, to try to figure out new ways to do things, to really solve this new challenge we face, this next challenge we face of ensuring that all of this progress we've made on clean air is equitably shared. And as part of those partnerships, we've supported the development of local air quality monitoring networks to really understand the pollution burden in these communities, to complement our statewide air monitoring network that measures statewide progress. And we've partnered with our colleagues in the land and water administrations to launch targeted compliance initiatives, to do multimedia inspections and sources in the overburdened communities, to really take a hard look and ensure that our air regulations and air permits and also water and land permits are being enforced in the facilities that are in areas facing environmental injustice. That's very much a work in progress. There's an enormous amount of additional work we need to do there, but we've started it through these community partnerships. We've learned a lot more about what can be scaled to other parts of the state. So that's the highlight for air. Looking forward to questions and discussions. Next.
Right, we'll go through all of the people who are going to testify, and then we'll entertain questions in that order.
Great.
So I presume Tyler's next up since he's standing up. So Tyler,
All righty.
welcome back and take it away.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, it's nice being here in a new role. So I'm Tyler Abbott, for the record, Director of the Land and Materials Administration here at MDE. Land and Materials Administration manages materials, as the name suggests, either in or on the land across the state of Maryland, be it solid waste, hazardous waste, as you mentioned, recycling efforts across the state, and then also looking at mining that happens, pretty heavily out in western Maryland, but does happen, closer to home here, as well as oil control with in-ground, above-ground oil storage tanks, as well as those at your home. You want to transition into my programs. So just to highlight a couple here, so lead poisoning prevention is also a big program that we have, and we have caseworkers that work across the state doing these environmental investigations in homes, protecting our children in Maryland. Since the inception of the program, we've been able to decrease the amount of childhood blood lead poisoning in Maryland. Our cases are down, 99% from what we had at historic levels, and it's taken a lot of effort over the last 20 years in order to get there. And there's always progress to be made. And with the new lowering of the elevated blood lead action level, we have even more work to do. So looking forward to bringing in additional inspectors of the program. We're ramping up our casework and really going to put a new emphasis or continued emphasis on protecting children here in Maryland from dangers that might be inside their home. The last thing also, just a hot topic to mention is I know a lot of folks here are very interested in recycling as well as source reduction, and so our administration does get to administer all of the recycling laws, and we're working on the organics recycling law, which is an important one that we've been talking about as well. And also looking at those recycling markets development, our team has put a lot of effort into developing or working with the community to start developing these recycling markets and see what we're having struggles with in Maryland, and then putting emphasis on those so that we're finding these markets, we're making it cost effective to recycle and get different materials out of the landfills over in the end. I know I have another slide here, but I just also went through everything that's on these slides. And so I'm going to give a little bit time back, and I will switch over to Lee Curry here, and I'll be back for questions.
Step on up and welcome back.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Lee Curry, Maryland Department of the Environment. I have the fortunate opportunity to be the Director of the Water and Science Administration. As you know, in Maryland, we are very water-rich, water-wealthy in many ways. We have the Chesapeake Bay, which our state wraps itself around. We also have the coastal bays. We actually have 19,000 miles of streams and rivers. So if you think about that, that's like driving to California 3 times. I think that's just an enormous opportunity and enormous responsibility just in what we have in front of us. So from that perspective, the Water and Science Administration oversees the protection, the restoration, the assessment, the standards setting for all of those water bodies. But it's the Chesapeake Bay. We set the standards. We develop the plan in coordination with our partner agencies, and we work to accomplish that. We also have the responsibility of authorizing any discharges under the Clean Water Act to these waterways. So a tremendous responsibility in terms of setting standards and make sure that discharges are protective of public health and also protective of our ecosystems. We have a tremendous amount of wetlands. When we think about our wetlands in Maryland, we have more shoreline in Maryland than there is in the entire state of California, just to, again, offer another perspective. So within the department, we have the responsibility to make sure any activities that affect those wetlands, those waterways are done in a way that are responsible and we're protecting the ecosystem. Some of those projects are also restoration projects. One thing we've had a priority for is working towards making sure that restoration projects move forward quickly. We remove as many obstacles as we can in terms of moving forward with that restoration. The second big part of the Water and Science Administration is protecting our drinking water. We oversee and have responsibility for the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. About 80% of our population of the 6 million people in Maryland rely on public water systems. Those water systems are overseen by the department, by the Water and Science Administration. And overseeing means going to those systems, talking with those systems, helping those systems when there's emergencies like the one that we just had this weekend. I had a very dedicated team of folks that were out there all weekend that are out there today, and also coordinating with our other state agencies to make sure that that communities have safe and sustainable drinking water. We also, under that program, under the Safe Drinking Water Act, within the drinking water program, we also are responsible for any appropriations of water. So making sure that, again, water is being used in a responsible way so that it's plentiful for all the citizens of the state. We also have our stormwater management program. This is setting standards for stormwater management, which looks at pollution runoff, but also the flooding impacts. We're in the process of modernizing our stormwater management regulations based on some bills that were passed
last year.
We also are responsible for the more than 600 dams that are located within Maryland. More than 200 of those are high hazard, basically in the high hazard category. So we have inspectors that are looking at all those facilities on a regular basis, making sure there are emergency action plans if there are impacts. We also have the responsibility of overseeing 4 licensing boards to make sure that the people that are doing work with, whether it's water and waste system operators, well drilling, marine contractors, or on-site disposal systems, are doing that, and they're trained and they're doing that in a responsible way. Next slide. We have roughly 8 programs. I would divide it up into probably 3 or 4 different areas. One, I would say water supply takes care of, our water supply, our safeguarding our public water systems, as well as the water appropriations. There's probably 4 different programs that are looking at Clean Water Act activities. These are discharge permits that protect our waterways, whether it's discharge from a wastewater plant, discharge from an industrial stormwater plant, discharge from a construction site. We register more than 5,000 construction activities under our stormwater construction permit, as well as looking at water reuse, water reclamation. We also have a compliance program, and as well as a field services program. Those folks are set up so that we have folks available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to make sure if an emergency comes up, we're well prepared to address any emergency, as well as to make sure that we are conducting routine inspections, and that we're supported by an operational services administration. Next slide. Just to point to some of our successes and some of our recent accomplishments. One, I just want to put at the top the Chesapeake Bay restoration. The state of Maryland has a plan that's approved by EPA. We have a good strategy in terms of how to reach our 2025 targets, 2025 goals. All the states in the region are responsible for getting to 2025. We have an obligation to make sure that Maryland is on track to meet that goal for 2025. We've also revised that plan to make sure that it not only meets it based on what we knew back when we developed it several years ago, but looking forward for climate resiliency, making sure that we've built in the additional reductions, so we have a plan in place to accomplish that. Part of achieving that plan is we've issued 10 county-wide stormwater permits for our largest counties. This creates an additional responsibility for more restoration. That restoration is green and blue infrastructure within our communities, helping to manage the pollution that comes from stormwater runoff. That's a critical part of resiliency and a critical part of our Chesapeake Bay restoration effort. We've also worked to incentivize green and blue infrastructure in communities under our stormwater permits too, so that there's a way that counties, our local jurisdictions who are responsible for this implementation effort, have the opportunity to get more credits, to get more benefit for green infrastructure, ways that not only reduce pollution, but ways that are practices that also help with flood resiliency. I also want to mention our Chesapeake Bay restoration. We had an impact this last year with the 2 wastewater treatment plants. We oversee 67 large plants. There's more than 200 smaller plants. 2 of our largest plants, Patapsco and Back River, located in Baltimore City, suffered some setbacks, I would say, in terms of maintenance and operation.
That's diplomatic.
Okay, thank you. Setbacks, and it affected our progress as a whole, as a state. We are committed and have continued to work with the city, to work in partnership with them. I want to say that the Back River wastewater treatment plant is now discharging below the permit ENR levels, but so I want to characterize where we are today. I also want to recognize that we're working to make sure that those plants are resilient. So if there are impacts in the future, that we don't end up in this situation again. The Patapsco wastewater treatment plant, a smaller plant located in an EJ area, is also closer, is just about at ENR levels. So I believe that we're back on track, just about back on track in terms of what's coming out of those plants, but there's more work that needs to be done. They're not in full compliance with the permit. I also want to highlight from the drinking water program, looking at forever chemicals. We have a science-based plan. We've looked at, this is PFAS. We have monitored all the community water systems in Maryland. There's 464. We're out in front of EPA to some respects in terms of what we've identified is where there's some public health concerns. And it's important and beneficial that we have that information because we're now able to, since we have information on those communities, we can better connect them with the federal infrastructure funding that is coming down the pipeline. So that's one of our priorities right now, is to reduce that risk to those communities. I think with that, I think I covered most of water, but I'll be happy to answer any questions later. And thank you for the opportunity to provide the briefing.
Yeah, thank you very much. Madam Secretary, last week we had a briefing from the Maryland Environmental Service, and Back River and Patapsco were brought up. I asked for, and they sent to me, the fundamental reports that they pulled together for those projects, and they're long. I haven't had a chance to read through all of them, but what I asked for and what I also received and what I have to read and analyze are the management reports for those two facilities so that we can really get ahead of these problems before the next major storm event, because that's apparently what has been happening. So, okay, in any case, I'm going to start to entertain questions from all of the individuals who testified, and the first question is going to go to Delegate Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good, well, I guess we're afternoon. What? Oh, okay. Nice to meet you, Madam Secretary. Welcome.
you.
We're glad to have you. Nice to
Thank you.
see you again, Lee. I have two questions, if I may, Mr. Chair. The first one, Madam Secretary, I was very happy to hear about your commitment to enforcement. That has been a big challenge. And one of the challenges, as I've talked to Lee about, he knows exactly where I'm going with this one, is the staffing challenges. Can you talk to us a little bit, and I don't know whether you want to defer to Lee on this, about how you're staffing up your inspectors and your enforcement of water, I'll say water safety?
Good meeting you. Well, I am going to turn it over to Lee. However, I will say, in terms of a general overall statement on how we are going to staff up, I have made it a priority that we're going to look at the vacancies that we have. We're going to ensure that we have the right people in the right place, in the right jobs. And so I've already asked us to look at the strategy, the hiring strategy, to make sure we can get the right people in those positions. But Lee, why don't you talk specifically about the strategy that you have?
Yes, so there was a report that we provided to the General Assembly, I think it was back in October, that identified the positions that were needed. It's my understanding that those positions were recognized as part of the budget for both the permitting program and the compliance program. And what that does is that gets us part of the way to where we need to be. Not all the way, but part of the way. What that will do is, we talked about administratively extended permits. Over the past year, we were able to reduce that by about half, but we're not there yet. So I think with the additional resources within that program, for the permits program, we'll be able to accomplish that goal and get us to where we need to be. The second part is with compliance. And there's additional resources that were identified that would go towards not only inspectors to go out to the sites, but we recognize it takes staff in the office to be able to support those inspectors as well as attorneys, because when we face compliance issues, we need resources there. And it's my understanding that there's resources committed to all of those areas.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, follow up if I may? Thank you. So you said you reduced your administratively extended permits, also known as zombie permits, by about half. So how many are outstanding?
We started with with the total universe of permits, I think there were around 600. I forget the exact number. We had about 190 of those that we needed to continue with, or that we needed to resolve. We completed this past year about 90 of those. So we made it about halfway there. I think we were at an administratively extended permit rate of about 40%, so we probably reduced it down to 20%. But again, what's going to happen is as we continue to resolve permits or issue new permits, the old permits expire. So that's one of the challenges that we face.
Right, thank you. And Mr. Chair, one more question, if I may? Thank you very much. Lee, MDE has done a really good job on PFAS, and it's you've been pretty transparent on a number of things that you've been testing and putting out there. Can you give us a little bit more information on those areas that have had high PFAS tests in their water? And you mentioned that you're trying to connect them with some of the federal infrastructure funding for remediation. How many of those jurisdictions are in Maryland, and are they in any particular area?
So all of the systems that we tested, about 480 some systems, are all located within Maryland. So they're all, of course, all public water systems. Right now, we identified, I believe it's about 49 systems that we think, and keep in mind, we're predicting what EPA is going to do. EPA hasn't set a regulatory threshold yet for PFAS in drinking water. They've issued health advisories, but not a regulatory threshold. We expect that threshold will probably be released in February. So the EPA is a little behind in where they need to be. We've estimated where we think it's going to land based on what we've seen in other states and from some of the scientific information. We think there's probably about 49 systems in Maryland that are affected. The systems with the highest levels, we were able to find alternate water sources right away. The systems tend to be located kind of out in central Maryland in a kind of a fractured rock area. So we found some in Carroll County. We found some in Frederick County. We're also seeing it in the northern part of the state, northeast, up around Cecil County, and we have found some elevated levels around the Salisbury region in these public water systems. So once we take that 6 off the list where we've been able to find alternate water sources, it leaves about 42 to 43 systems. Many of those systems are smaller systems. Some of those are EJ communities based on low income. So I think that's one of the challenges that we face right now is while there's dollars out there, we want to make sure that we can get those dollars to them. So we're currently working with several NGOs to help serve as what I would call connectors to be able to connect with those systems to get them funding. Our approach is we want to first, if there's an opportunity to connect water systems to public water systems, that's a great approach because you don't have the ongoing maintenance. The second option is can we find an alternate source by changing the well location in some way, and third would be maintenance. The problem with the maintenance, if you're in some of these more challenged communities, is it requires an ongoing cost, and it's going to require an operator to be able to maintain that system. So that hopefully that lays out some of the challenges we face.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Madam Secretary, welcome
Thank you.
to Environment and Transportation, and I hope you make it a regular appearance. We certainly, we all do.
Indeed. Of course.
But I've got several questions, and one is you'll probably hear a little bit about the Conowingo Dam in your briefing. That's why you're in that chair. I'm the unofficial chair of the Conowingo Caucus. But recently there was a stay in the U.S. Appeals Court decision on the 50-year lease, and it's concerning, especially for me in my district, is immediately under the dam with the impact to the area. And you talked a great deal about the impacts of discharge, and it's one of the big concerns for us. And so I would assume you're going to be involved pretty heavily in this renegotiation of whatever lease may go forward.
Absolutely. It's just been 5 days on the job.
I
And
know, I
I
know.
think 4 days we've been talking about Conowingo Dam. And so I'm very familiar with what's going on. I do have a briefing scheduled with my staff to talk about it. Vacating that is really important, and we're trying to develop a strategy going forward. Suzanne, would you like to add anything else on that?
Right, and I think Lee Curry has a really good articulation of our multifaceted strategy with Conowingo, but in terms of the license being vacated, we are working very closely with our attorney generals to identify a path forward that recognizes, puts Maryland residents and citizens at the top and protective of our environment. So as we move forward through this process, that's top of mind. But Lee has a strategy. Recognize that the Conowingo strategy isn't simply the legal strategy, that there are other sides of what we are currently doing. Go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, just briefly, I mentioned the legal strategy, absolutely. We want to make sure the restoration that is currently underway continues. We want to hold all that in place, and we're going to have the opportunity to brief the Secretary through all those details. Also, the other parts of this plan are, one, there's a Conowingo watershed implementation plan, just like the 6 states in the District of Columbia have these plans. So there has been money that's gone to that plan from Maryland to help move that forward. EPA has approved and has supported that plan, so that's the second strategy. The third strategy is recognizing that there could be an opportunity for innovative and beneficial reuse of the material behind the Conowingo Dam if a dredging activity did occur, a large-scale activity. So it's really looking at all facets of this to use all of those approaches to solve this problem, not one or the other.
Thank you.
So you should know that it is a priority, so I'll be
Well,
working very
we'll make
quickly.
sure it's a priority, but, you know, as you know, the Susquehanna River begins in Cooperstown, New York, and finds its way down into Maryland. And 40% of the fresh water that goes into the bay each day comes across that dam. And right now, it has no trapping capacity. So, you know, we're just very concerned at this point that you brought up in your comments earlier about the discharges into the Chesapeake Bay and the impacts going forward. So it's just very concerning to make sure that we try and get this deal right, and that everyone involved, you know, does well, but we also protect the Chesapeake Bay. I'm going to move on from that because you'll hear about that later. But with the you talk about community infrastructure, and I was actually in a Zoom COG meeting with municipalities right before I got here, and one of the questions they asked me was about, you know, funds for infrastructure. Many of these, especially where I am over on the shore communities that are right by the bay are really challenged right now with infrastructure. And they asked the question, A, is the ARP money used up? Is there money left over? You know, how can they get some of this community infrastructure funding to help out in some of these areas? Because, you know, many places in Maryland are right next to the bay and certainly would have an impact. So I have a question about, is there money still available, and you know, by what means would they try and achieve some success in gaining some of that funding? And so I'll leave that question right at this point.
Okay, I'm going to,
Yeah, I'll start.
That's
yeah.
really a question for the Deputy Secretary.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, there is money, and we work very closely.
Remind us what the ARP program is.
Well, the ARP, I mean, we have infrastructure funding available. We have a variety of, we have a water quality financing department. So it's not just ARP, it's all types of federal funding. Yeah, do you want to talk about ARP?
Do a quick meal here.
Sorry.
That's all right. Yep. So with all of the federal funding that was coming through, we with the way that the federal funding was coming through, we are running those through our existing state revolving funds. And so as your municipalities apply for this funding, from the beginning of December to the end of January, they are going to be, applying for those funds. And so now, rather than having a lot of separate pots of funding, those are just going to be larger pots of funding. So we're funding more applications in that process and able to get further down the line. In addition, there are a few other pots of funding that are out. The applications are in the same process, just not from the state revolving fund. So when you're looking at PFAS, or if you're looking at your lead service line replacement, those are all still in the same application process. And we're working with a lot of those local municipalities to get that money out the door.
So Tyler, did you say the end of January? Is that what you said?
That's when the application period ends, at the end of January, for some of the revolving funds. Now, I do want to add that in our selection process for the revolving funds, we've included equity. So equity is a key decision maker. But I also want to emphasize the amount of engagement we have with local governments to ensure they're aware of and taking advantage of these federal sources of funds. So we try to do that. It's never enough, right? So anytime that any of you are working with local governments, we welcome. You can give them my contact information. We want to make sure they have access to this information. So that work is ongoing.
And if I could just mention too, if they don't have their application in by the end of this month, that's not that they've missed, being able to get any of this federal infrastructure money. So these are going on for the next 4 years in addition as well. And so there is still ample time, and, identify those needs, have your engineering studies, and, we can have conversations in the future about what kind of funding you need.
I appreciate that. And one follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Curry about the Patapsco wastewater treatment plant. I know there was a period of time when they were having some PCB problems there. I believe a few months ago, or have those issues been corrected?
Are we talking about PCBs, or there were issues with hydrocarbons too?
Well, the PCBs specifically, I know
Okay.
they were leaching into the bay.
Yeah, the PCBs, I believe that they were required to submit a PCB remediation plan. I'd have to go back and check to get the information on what exactly was part of that plan.
All right, thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Next question goes to
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
next question goes to Delegate Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome. I'd like to add my welcome to you. I know that we're hoping to get together and have a one-on-one at some point soon.
Yes.
But I have a couple of questions, actually two different areas of discussion. One is about, but before I do that, I want to say that the Conowingo Dam is important to everyone in Maryland. Whether you're in the DC suburbs or the Eastern Shore or Western Maryland, the Chesapeake Bay is the heartbeat of this state. And so really, I hope that the first chance you get when the weather is nice, you get out on the bay and get a chance to see it in real life, because it is a really remarkable estuary. And a lot of us believe that the deal that was vacated should have been vacated because it was not anywhere near adequate for the ongoing costs of making it workable for the state. And it's been around for a long time, 100 years, and it needs major work.
Yeah.
But that's not what I wanted to ask about. I want to ask about stormwater management issues. We see, because of climate change, we're seeing more and more flooding everywhere in the state. And the stormwater management regulations that went into effect 8 or 10 years ago are not apparently adequate anymore. In my area, almost every time we have a heavy rain, we get flooding off of some of the development, some of the new things that are under construction that are meeting the regulations that we put in place. They're following, the developers are following the law, but the law hasn't caught up with the reality of the storms. Are you looking at that? Are you going to have recommendations on how to update the stormwater regulations for new development in the state?
Absolutely. I'm going to turn it over to you to answer, but eventually, by the way, I'll be here long enough to be able to answer some of these questions. But I don't want to say too much where I haven't really gotten a full briefing. But absolutely, that is very critical, very important to me. And as I learn more, I'll make sure that I take what you said into consideration. But Lee, where are we with that?
So there was a bill that was passed a couple years ago that really required us to do three things. One is to identify what information best exists. Are we currently using the right rainfall information to design the developments, the structures that are out there today, the ones that you're seeing that are where you're seeing flooding? Two is to identify areas in the state that are currently flooding or have the potential to flood. And three is to modernize our stormwater regulations. We're in the process right now of a three-phase approach to modernizing those regulations. We're working with a stakeholder advisory committee to help guide those regulations, working with a diverse panel of experts. Right now, we have draft regulations, which are the first step, which takes the regulations you mentioned from 8 to 10 years ago and is forward-looking and includes some adjustments from climate change. The second step is to look more broadly across the state and to really look at where there are flood concerns across the state, to do really more robust watershed or flood management plans. Think of Ellicott City and the work that they've done there with their flood management plan, because we feel that those flood management plans are going to better connect communities with FEMA dollars. We think there's a big benefit from that perspective. So I would say that's stage two, and that's where we're heading to next.
I just want to add that the flooding that you mentioned occurs first in communities impacted by environmental justice. So part of our work, along with updating and modernizing and using predictive tools to regulate, is also prioritizing green and blue infrastructure, which can be part of the solutions in communities impacted by environmental justice. So that is very much a focus and a priority of resource spending and planning with local governments.
Thank you very much for that, and I'll look forward to see how all that develops. My other question is about the map you have where all you have the field offices. And I just wonder, I have just a question because it jumps out at me that there's nothing in the DC suburbs or Southern Maryland of any of these field offices. And there's a lot of population and a lot of watershed. I wondered if you might look at maybe locating a couple of field offices in Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Southern Maryland, so that people don't have to travel to really get face-to-face operation with and build relationships with the agencies.
I think that's a great idea. I would definitely look into that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question goes to Delegate Boyce.
I didn't think I was next. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. Certainly excited about what this year holds and the next couple of years hold, especially as you gain tenure, Madam.
Thank you.
A couple of my colleagues already answered my question, but I did want to follow up on the question that Delegate Jacobs talked about as it relates to infrastructure and monies. And so we talked a lot about the Patapsco plant and the Back River plant, and I understand from the Back River side is that the facilities could use some modernization, and so I'm curious about the department's plans as it relates to monies that are coming through, infrastructure monies, and how we're going to begin to modernize a lot of these facilities, one. And then the second part of that is how we're going to, I think my other question was about air quality control and air monitors. I know that was an issue in the past about the increase to have more air monitors across the state as well as in EJ community. So I want to talk about that infrastructure to kind of build up MDE.
So I'll turn it over, but I will say this, as part of the partnership that we have with Back River, as you all know, we've been doing a lot of work with that wastewater treatment plant. We are ensuring that they have the resources, utilizing those, the funds that you mentioned, the IIJA, and I think the IRA funds in there as well.
Bay restoration.
Yep, we're looking at every source that we can to help them as partners have the funding that they need for the maintenance part, because resiliency is a part of it. We can't just walk away because they're meeting those pollution levels today. So it's the sustainability that we're looking at. But why don't I let you expand a little more?
I think that covers a lot of it.
All right.
Just to be honest, because the resiliency piece of it is important. We're working to make sure the additional funds that are coming in, whether it's additional state revolving funds, whether it's special funds for drinking water, whether it's lead service lines, whether it's forever chemicals, all these are different pots of money. We want to make sure that that the folks know about this, and we're working to engage the communities and engage the partners such as Baltimore City to make sure that that awareness is there and that we help them apply and get the funds they need in these communities.
No, in terms of air quality and the monitors, Chris, do you want to address that?
Sure thing, yeah. Thank you for the question. It's a very important issue. So we maintain a statewide air monitoring network that's effectively one monitor per county, and that's to comply with the Federal Clean Air Act, and that's meant to measure air quality across large areas. It's not meant to or designed to measure air quality in a particular area. That's a gap. And the exciting opportunity we have with new technology and new low-cost sensors is that we can build local air monitoring networks where we get lots of sensors and we concentrate them in an overburdened community to get a much better understanding of the pollution burden in that community. So we've partnered with a couple of communities and with university partners to deploy these networks. The state so far has not been a funder because we don't have the budget, and our funding is for the federal network. So far they've been primarily funded by the University of Maryland Center for Community Engagement and Environmental Justice and Health, or SEEGE, and Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. And so we've supported the deployment of networks in Cheverly, Maryland, in Prince George's County, and Curtis Bay in southwest Baltimore. And the Curtis Bay network, the newer one, is very sophisticated multi-pollutant air monitoring network. It's been up for several months, and data is coming in, and we're helping to interpret it. We help to deploy the sensors. We help to calibrate the sensors, interpret the data. But recently, we did win a grant from EPA under some of the new federal funding so that the state can start directly funding some of that in 3 communities, Curtis Bay, Cheverly, and Turner Station on the other side of the harbor from Curtis Bay. So it's an exciting and important new area, and we're eager to support it.
I'm excited. And then I have one last question, Mr. Chair. I know like my list got short, so I know the chair is happy. We talk a lot about EJ communities, and the Secretary, you said this was your essentially priority. I just want to get a sense from you, what is an EJ community? Many people have many different definitions and thoughts about.
Oh, that's a trick question.
It is a trick question. Well, no, not necessarily. But I'd like to just hear from you because you do talk so passionately about it.
Yeah, there are several factors that we use, that I use, EPA uses now. They have a definition that's out, but we look at income, we look at educational levels in the communities. There's just a variety of factors that we look at to determine what is a disadvantaged community. We also look at, I know we have the, what is the EJ screen called here?
We have the EJ screen.
We have the EJ screen here. Obviously, we're looking at, I don't know exactly what those factors are that are in the EJ screen where those disadvantaged communities are highlighted. But yeah, I look at several different factors in terms of income.
Language, income,
yeah.
and minority status are 3 of the big ones that we use in our EJ screen. And as the national conversation, we have definitions in statute now, but we continue to work nationally to engage, learn, and adjust as the national conversation and the Maryland-based conversation shift towards, achieving measurable results.
Yeah, exactly. So, good question. Again, those are the ones that jump out for me. But as I work toward making sure that the EJ communities and disadvantaged communities are a high priority, and that we are looking at everything that we do, we're making sure that there's that equity lens there. But I will be looking at the factors that we have as well as other factors as I see appropriate.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before I recognize the next person, Delegate Boyce is, as always, far too, far too, no, she doesn't brag. She actually introduced language into the the Climate Solutions Bill, along with many of the advocates in the EJ community, to very specifically define how we define it in the Climate Solutions Bill. And an important factor in that definition is that we didn't define it too broadly, so that communities that are not at risk would be able to hijack that definition to suit their own needs. Isn't that so, Delegate Boyce? Okay.
Smart. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question is going to go to Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Madam Secretary. It's certainly good to see you here.
Thank you.
I have read some things about you, and I'm totally impressed.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. My question is relevant to stormwater management, and perhaps Mr. Abbott might be an applicable person to talk about this. You talked about some of the stormwater management issues 8 to 10 years ago, and at that time, I was chair of the Natural Resources Subcommittee, which handled a lot of the stormwater management issues. And I think that the then chair, Maggie McIntosh, and the speaker asked me to be chair of that, because in my day job, I designed and oversaw the construction and permitting of stormwater management ponds. I've had a conversation with the Professional Engineer Society last week, and then just this week, a conversation with some of the land development engineers in the area. And we were discussing the mathematical formula for the design of the stormwater management ponds. Specifically, the one item in the formula, which is the intensity, which tells you if it's a 10-year pond or a 100-year pond, because nowadays the 100-year storms are coming at 10-year levels. They suggested, the Professional Engineering Society and the land development engineers just 2 days ago, suggested to me that there is an effort afoot now to readjust those calculations for these stormwater management ponds. And I know, Madam Secretary, you've only been here for 4 days, so that does make you the expert. So I'm just asking that when you start to, if you have, as the professional engineers have told me, start looking at these calculations in your department.
Ali, I am going to turn it over to you because I know you're on this.
This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, so I'll try to keep it short. But yes, sir, there is information available today that is looking at those rainfall statistics, and we used some of that information to make adjustments to the current stormwater management regulations. But I do want the committee to be aware that in partnership with the Maryland State Highway Administration, Maryland Department of Transportation, there is a broader effort within the region to actually redo all of the rainfall information that is used for design. The current design information is from 2004. That was, NOAA puts it together. There's a contract in place, and I believe within the next, I have to give you the date, I think it's within the next 2 to 3 years we should have that information. But I think an important point is we didn't wait for that information prior to start making some changes with the best information we have.
Is there any, if I may, Mr. Chair, is there any timeframe, projected timeframe where some of these things might be resolved, not resolved, but some of the information put out to the designers who are putting these stormwater management ponds together? Just to follow up on Delegate Healy's question as well, that the intensity, the rainfalls are getting more and more intense.
Right. So right now, the department has draft regulations, and that's with the secretary. We'll sit down and talk with her. She's asked me about these regulations already.
Yeah.
In terms of flooding, recognizing the important priority that is in Maryland. But that is in the first phase of them, is to provide at least the most recent information and then to adjust our current design so it looks out into the future. And then we need to take future steps in terms of a more broad improvement in our stormwater regulations. One thing with respect to flooding, when the earlier regulations were put in place, each local jurisdiction is handling flood resiliency a little differently. We're currently doing a survey across the state to determine how jurisdictions are doing their work and to make sure that the department works to set kind of a common baseline across the state, or let's say reset that common baseline.
Thank you. And please
Yes,
keep us advised, and welcome, Madam Secretary.
Thank you. We will do that.
Once again, before I recognize the next person, you are coming to discover that the members of my committee, both Democrat and Republican, are extremely knowledgeable about the details of these things. And I always like to say that we like to get into the weeds even if they're not invasive. So the next question will go to Delegate Long. We're newbies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary. It's great to see you. I have a specific question referencing your restoration projects. What exactly, do you mind speaking to your current or impending projects for bay restoration? Specifically speaking, I have a very unique interest because I have parts of northern Calvary County and southern Prince George's County. So we have a Peninsula County, Tucson River on one side, the bay on the other side. So it's of great interest to me specifically.
Okay, yeah, so this, again, comes under our Water and Science Administration, and Lee touched a little bit on the fact that we try to have restoration permits, so it's a different permitting pathway than, a development or some kind of, impact permit. So that's the first thing that Lee highlighted, but there are a variety of different types of restoration projects. We were the first state in the nation to have living shoreline as the first tool to consider in shoreline erosion. And living shorelines benefit the Chesapeake Bay, benefit the species and the habitats and ecosystems in the Chesapeake Bay as they address erosion due to sea level rise. So shoreline protection through living shorelines is a key strategy of our Chesapeake Bay program. But there are a variety of others, some of which are led by other agencies like DNR with the oyster restoration. We support that with permitting. We support that with engagement from our wetlands and waterways. The entire Chesapeake Bay restoration, the more resilient that bay is, that is our largest single investment in climate resilience. So the benefits that we see from bay restoration pay us back on our economic well-being, but also on our resiliency to climate change. There are water quality benefits that extend far up from the bay. So you may be experiencing shoreline issues in southern Maryland, but some of those issues start up the river, up the Patuxent River, up the Potomac River. So we want to make sure that your water quality coming down those rivers is protected. That's a large part of what Lee Curry does. Lee, I am sure you want to expand on my answer there.
I think just given where you're located too, living shorelines is something that we've tried to promote. These are the softer shorelines, the ones that are more resilient, that also provide water quality and habitat benefits. Also within your communities, there's opportunity to improve older infrastructure. Maybe some of these stormwater ponds that we were talking about before, there can be additional features added to them. And this is what counties are investing in. Have invested quite a bit in these in terms of how can we make them greener, how can we make them reduce more pollution. There has been great pilots across the state in terms of this idea of smart technology and smart ponds. So some of these older stormwater ponds have been outfitted with technology that looks at weather forecasted information and then adjusts water levels to actually benefit both water quality, the pollution coming out, as well as flood mitigation. And then a key strategy in Maryland is, again, our wastewater treatment plants. So making sure that we have upgraded all of them, all the majors to ENR. We've the best technology. And I would say it's making sure that those plants are maintained, operated into the future, as well as ensuring that the collection systems are maintained and operated so we don't have overflows that occur, especially with pressure and stress from more extreme weather conditions.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, one quick, if I may. My last thing I want to highlight what my colleague Delegate Healy said would be great to have one of these MDE offices in Southern Maryland or Prince George's County. We only have about 15 bodies of water in Prince George's County, so it'd be great to have one of these offices in Southern Maryland. Thank you.
I lived in Prince George's County for 12 years, so.
Oh,
yes,
where?
In Bowie.
Oh, okay. I suspected that would happen. Okay, thanks a lot. Let me next turn to the Vice Chair of the committee, Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Madam Secretary. I'll add my welcome to everyone else's, and it's very nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a couple questions, if that's okay. Wanted to circle back to wastewater treatment plants, and it's certainly good to hear that Back River and Patapsco are at or near compliance at this point. I know it's taken a lot of work to get them back in compliance. My question is, has MDE altered its inspection and compliance procedures so that we don't have a major violation at any of the majors moving forward?
Go ahead.
Sure. So we've looked at this issue and the investments that the state's made in these facilities. One thing we've taken 2 actions so far to make some changes. Actually 3. There was a meeting today with the Maryland Environmental Service and all of our inspectors to kind of talk through what happened at Back River, what we observed, and is there anything we could learn from that to make any changes just in our standard operating procedures. So that's one step. 2 is recognizing the importance of maintenance and also making sure that we have the best information from these facilities. We're currently working with the industry for some of the facilities, larger facilities where there's just more infrastructure on site to include in the permits the requirement for third-party engineering reports, which would be an assessment of the facility. What's the condition of it? What are they missing? What should be added? And I feel like that will help guide our inspectors moving forward. So we've already started that process actually for Patapsco and Back River as part of the state's requirement in getting those facilities back to where they need to be was to require a third-party engineering report. That's being used as a guide right now through negotiations. The third step we're taking is what we call an early warning system. While we're at the site on a regular basis at these facilities, there are times when we're not there, and we were part of the permit. Permit's comprehensive. It requires a facility, an owner, an operator to let us know if there's a problem. There's monitoring data that occurs at each of these facilities that gets sent to a centralized data system. We're using that data system to indicate early if we start seeing a change in water quality so that we can respond faster.
Okay, that sounds great. Glad to hear the early warning system and other steps. My second question, different topic. I noticed in your presentation, you mentioned that with respect to permits, that climate change resilience with green and blue infrastructure incentives and requirements are built into permits. So I just wanted to ask if you could comment on that, elaborate on the types of incentives and requirements that are being built into permits now that maybe weren't before.
Okay, absolutely. I'll give 2 examples. One is our stormwater permits. These are the large countywide permits for the 10 largest counties in the state. There's a requirement for restoration. As part of that restoration, there's what we call a way to credit each of these practices in terms of how they count towards the requirements of the permit. We tried to add additional credits if there was green infrastructure added to a stormwater pond. If a stormwater pond was able to capture more water and hold it, we gave additional credits for that. we're providing credits for tree planting, for tree canopy cover, as well as we're providing for the first time credit for I guess it's more of a conservation. If they keep an area that has a high pressure for development, can we keep that green infrastructure in place? So it's a combination of those two things. So I think from a stormwater perspective, that's probably the best answer for the green infrastructure piece. We've also included climate language in our wastewater treatment permits, recognizing that they should be preparing for more extreme events. How are they to report back to us? How are they planning for these influxes of extreme flows, as well as how are they planning for emergency outages as a result of more extreme weather?
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, next question goes to Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and if I may, I have two questions as well. Welcome, let me add my welcome, Madam Secretary.
Thank you.
And my first question, I think is for you, which is that I do laud the Department of Environment and our state for all that we're doing to try to keep the Bay alive and vibrant. But following up on a point that Delegate Jacobs made about a lot of the water sources that flow into the Bay come from other states. And so my question is, what are your plans, or maybe you haven't thought about this yet, but what are your plans to help strengthen our relationship with those other partners and to be more aggressive about getting them to clean up their act? We had quite a bit of discussion about Pennsylvania in the last session and the Susquehanna, and I just wondered if you've given that any thought.
Well, the first thing is there's a suit that's out now with where US EPA, I think they're in the middle of negotiating a settlement, which is where we're trying to hold Pennsylvania accountable for their contribution to pollution, and we're trying to get them to stand tall on what they committed to. I think New York was a part of that suit at first, and they, I'll just say it plainly, got their act together, and they're no longer a part of it. So it's important to me. I will continue to put pressure on US EPA to get a settlement and get it resolved. And as far as I'm concerned, from where I sit, I will continue those partnerships and make sure that we're holding the other states accountable. You wanted to say something?
I just want to add
please.
that the Secretary may not know that she serves as a commissioner on the Susquehanna River Basin Commission.
Now I know. I have more power than I thought. No, I'm just teasing.
And that's an important commission to bring New York, Maryland, and Pennsylvania together and work in partnership with the River Commission, but also with our other states.
Thank you for that, and thank you for pushing that forward. And my second question, if I may, Mr. Chair, is for Mr. Hoagland. I just wondered if you could give us a sense of recent asbestos remediation, where those projects are occurring, how frequent they are these days, because I know there's been quite a lot of work over the years done on remediation of asbestos. I just kind of wanted to get a picture of what the current situation is. Thank you.
Sure thing. I'm afraid I don't have any numbers at my fingertips, but we're happy to follow up. But generally, it's when renovation and demolition is occurring in older building stock is when it comes up. But I'd be happy to get some numbers for you.
I think we would be, my staff would be interested in having that, if you could forward that to me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
And Madam Secretary, being able to really have a victory for us. It's not just for the state of Maryland, but especially for the farmers in rural communities of the state of Maryland, because it's appreciated by me and my committee that folks in rural Maryland have really stepped up and have really, our farmers missing right now. But the point is that, they have really stepped up and done their part, and they want the farmers in Pennsylvania to likewise step up and do their part. Okay. Next question goes to Delegate Dr. Siliberti.
Okay, you insist. Madam Secretary, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to welcome you to the most dynamic committee in Annapolis.
Thank you.
Right here. using the numbers, the MDE by the numbers, to the gentleman to your left, I see that you had 39,516 sites inspected, 18,700 and change were approved. Any idea or any pattern as to why the 20,000 were not approved? Is there any pattern to that?
No, I'm not sure. We'd have to look into those numbers specifically.
That, and
Because
those are
I think
big,
that's sort of
big
two separate
numbers.
sets.
So again, the point is that we inspect a lot of facilities. We achieve, meet, and overachieve on a lot of the EPA required frequency of the inspections. You've heard all of the directors here and the secretary say, we want to do more. We want to achieve more. But not every inspection is a success, and often we find problems. We work to resolve that. We want to work with permitted entities who are always in a compliance mindset, which means they're working to 100% compliance 100% of the time. And when they are not, the first phone call they make is to MDE. So that's our approach with compliance and expecting additional resources to expand that.
So there's no pattern at this point.
So,
We
you
can
know,
wait on that.
that's all the facilities together. So there is a pattern, wastewater treatment plants. As you know, there's a nationwide labor challenge. And so ensuring that we have certified operators has been a consistent pattern. We have been working with local governments, with wastewater operators, with water supply operators to ensure that they have adequate staffing in addition to the maintenance issues.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, next question goes to Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, sorry, that was a little loud. And Madam Secretary, I also want to echo the welcome. Really excited to have you here with us and look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
I'd like to shift and talk, well, I guess some people have talked about stream restoration a little bit. So we've heard stories of some stream restorations and actually seen some sites where there have been large numbers of mature trees removed as a part of that process. Sometimes then the animal species disappear from the area, you know, and it may be decades before that the ecosystem recovers for that. So my question is, when these stream restoration projects are planned, is anything being done to try to protect the ecosystem of that area where the stream restoration is being done?
Go ahead.
Okay, sure.
Sure, and we'll, Lee and I will tag team this. So stream restoration in Maryland has been an extremely successful tool for our bay restoration goals, and it can be shocking to some of our residents. So we are aware of concerns that our residents have raised, especially about removing mature trees and doing a better job of outreach and engagement with communities, of educating about stream restoration. In parts of our state, particularly areas that have been developed, this nature of the streams has functionally and fundamentally shifted. So the ecosystem that you see today is actually not the most beneficial ecosystem for our waterways. So what happens over time, particularly when you have development, is you get deep cuts. So the creek that I grew up in Montgomery County was deeply incised or cut down into and there was mature trees around that. Imagine now with our changing climate and our flashier weather patterns, when the flood comes down that deeply incised stream, the flow is intense and the damage and flooding that occurs from that can be devastating. Before we had significant development, the natural state of those creeks, which none of us remember, was more swampy in what we call braiding. And that broader floodplain, not so incised, but now spread out, slows down the water and protects our communities from flooding. It does require, in certain cases, a shift from what we call a hardwood mature forest to a floodplain forest. And that, in some cases, the safest way to get there is to remove those mature trees. Stunning for some people, we recognize that. And again, making sure that we're communicating effectively with the communities about what is being done, why, and what the science behind it is, has been a really important engagement that we've had with our local governments that want to use stream restoration as part of their tool.
Thank you for that, and I do think that engagement is really important because people don't understand that that's what's going to happen. But in some cases, I guess, are you looking at projects upstream that can possibly reduce that flow and maybe require less stream restoration downstream?
Yeah, the planning, and especially in stormwater, really looks up and down. It looks at many factors. Temperature, for instance, is really important and increasingly important for some of our streams. So really looking at it as a system and not just what we might call a reach, that is very important. Sometimes, in all honesty, there's access, there's private property rights, there's a number of complicating factors in there, but we always want to approach any restoration effort as a system.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, may I ask one more?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And are you looking at also, are you measuring the results long-term to ensure that these projects are having the long-term impact that we expect them to?
We have, and not every stream restoration is the same, but overall, it's been very effective. Lee, do you want to add any specifics to that?
We are continuing to measure a subset of those to make sure that what was permitted and what we expected to occur has. I just want to echo that this is an outstanding educational opportunity to explain that here's how because it's important to know how we permit these restoration projects also, that we do look and to make sure that there is an ecosystem uplift in total that's going to be accomplished here, and that we are looking and have our when we review the permit or application, we're looking at trees that are being removed, and we're looking at any way to minimize impact during the site from construction. But I think it's important to see, as you have a project, what it looks like the first few months. It looks rough. The stream's been dug up in spots, but to see that same project 1 year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, you can see what it is compared to what it was. I think that's the part that we really need to make sure that folks fully understand, and that's what we've been trying to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Before I recognize Delegate Lehman, in Gaithersburg, we have a major stream restoration project, and unfortunately, some trees are being removed, and some of my constituents are not happy about that, and it's a challenge to explain, the science and the logistics of what all is taking place. So I appreciate the perspective that you had there, and I believe the last question is going to go to Delegate Lehman, and then we're going to go on to the update of the Maryland Climate Change Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was not going to comment on stream restoration. I thank my colleague, Delegate Ruth, for doing so. Mr. Chairman, I would just say respectfully that I have a disagreement with the response about that this is how these restorations should look and this is what we expect. I walked one of these sites, and it was absolutely devastating to see not only the trees gone, to see invasive species coming up. I cannot imagine that that's what we had in mind, and to see that the critters that had lived there, the birds, the wildlife were completely gone. And after making some inquiries about this, several of us that had walked that site were told, well, it could be years or maybe forever, if ever, before there's biodiversity back. That's what we were told, and we really do need to look upstream at mitigation first, I believe, and I'm not convinced that's being done, but thank you for allowing me to say that. And that doesn't need a response now. I'm glad to talk to you afterward, and I think several of us would welcome that conversation because it's a longer one. The questions I have are going back to our waterways, and first of all, to talk briefly about dams and dam safety. So I have a large dam in my district, the T. Howard Duckett Dam on the Patuxent River, and there have been a couple of issues with that. It's operated by WSSC, a couple of issues over the years, like some serious safety situations where WSSC decided at the 11th hour, after a period of heavy rain, to open all of the floodgates all at once with very little notice to the city of Laurel. I was on the county council at that time. It caused a big uproar. It caused serious safety challenges for the city to evacuate people downstream in the city, including a senior apartment complex. And one person further down over the county line in Anne Arundel probably died as a result of that. It was never proven, but it was a homeless person. There was a homeless encampment in that part of Anne Arundel, right on the Patuxent, and there was a woman found drowned a day or two later. What concerned me, and still concerns me, is that later when there was another issue, and this was around development and related to the dam, and it being opened with not enough notice, there was not a chief of dam safety at that time. That position was vacant. Is that position full now? And will that person be staying? I would never want to see in a state with, I think you said 600 or more dams, where that position is vacant ever.
I believe that position is full. We filled that position now because we've tried to staff that program, but I would say that that position, even when it was vacant, there was someone acting in that position. So there was always someone in charge, and there was always a dam safety personnel available 24/7 if there's any issues. So.
Okay. I was not able to get in touch with anyone the times that I was making those efforts.
Okay.
Happy to talk to you afterward about that as well. Then my second question is around sea level rise. So, you know, we talk a lot and we have appropriately about resiliency and about being climate ready. What if anything, can you say about what we're looking at doing to try to mitigate the impact of sea level rise, given how vulnerable Maryland is? It's like the third most vulnerable state in the U.S. behind, I think, Florida and Louisiana to sea level rise. And I'm talking about going beyond just building seawalls and that kind of thing. What else are we looking at doing around development or anything else to sort of mitigate on the front end sea level rise?
Thank you for that question. And with the Secretary's permission, I'll take first crack at it. Sea level rise is, you know, a key issue, and it is today already impacting at a landscape level many of our communities in Maryland. Southern Maryland is impacted today by sea level rise. The lower eastern shore and the coastal communities are impacted today. Ocean City. And the first example of how they're impacted today is managing water. Saltwater intrusion is impacting their water supply. So managing water effectively, and that includes what in some places is controversial, but we feel is essential, making sure that we manage our wastewater using spray irrigation to push back against saltwater intrusion, managed effectively, using all types of controls to protect public safety. But saltwater intrusion causes multiple failures. It's the first sign of sea level rise. Water supply is one. Impact on our agricultural community is another. But a third one is rising water tables. And right now we see landscape level change, particularly in our low-lying levels throughout our state, impacting our septic systems. And what I will ask of you, and I have asked of all our local government elected officials and local government folks, is planning. There is change happening now. Places in our state that are vibrant economically and are easy and reasonable to live in may not be easy and livable in just a few short years. If you don't have a septic system and you can't hook up to a local wastewater treatment plant, very quickly the value of your property can decrease by up to 80%. So it is essential that we begin planning, first with our water and sewer plans, that we begin to think about resiliency not just as seawalls, but as landscape level change and how expensive it will become to live in certain parts of our states. Flooding is important and needs a good plan, but there are other impacts.
Mr. Chairman, could I just add on some specifics to what the Deputy Secretary mentioned? One is Deputy Secretary Dorsey talked about spray irrigation, but also living shorelines is important. Making sure that anywhere where there's going to be some type of restoration or adjustment to that shoreline. Where it's appropriate, living shorelines are going in place. That's something that we're working to continue to promote, to continue to bring better information to. The other part of this is you have vulnerable septic systems along coastal areas. So where are the opportunities to connect septic systems to public sewer systems? So that's another opportunity to minimize some of that risk. We're also working on, with respect to where the state funding goes, there's something called a climate ready action boundary that says, okay, if you're below this, basically below this level, you really are not going to be able to invest state money in here because of the vulnerabilities associated with that. So there's several pieces that I wanted you to be aware of from an implementation front on actions that we're taking today, in addition to spray irrigation that the Deputy Secretary mentioned.
Thank you so much, and I'm especially glad to hear about your efforts to coordinate with local government, because that is so important all over the state, but as you said, on the lower shore where it's a really critical problem, and some of those counties are very small and have limited, funding for staff, engineering, and other staff, so I'm glad to hear the coordination. Thank you.
All righty then. We're going to move on to a review of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, but thank you to all of you who presented. And as you can see, Madam Secretary, this is a very engaged committee. And so,
Thank you.
And so we hope to work very closely with you and your deputies on all of these issues. So let me next call, well, Suzanne Dorsey is already with us, and let me call up Chris Hoagland, who I understand is also going to be presenting. There you are. Okay.
And Chair, I need to take the secretary to an appropriations briefing as well. So we will get started, and then with your permission, I'll get her to her next appointment.
Yes, feel free to abscond with yourselves at the appropriate time.
Oh, good news, staff just got an extension on that, so.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Great.
You can keep us.
Okay.
So I want to recognize Chris Hoagland, who is a national leader in climate policy. But I also want to just take a moment to reflect that a lot of what you'll hear and a lot of what's in the discussion around climate change is associated with our 60 by 31. Secretary McElwain and I have talked a lot about achieving that goal, and Chris will be a great, we will dive into that with Chris. I want to share that the Climate Change Commission also includes issues around adaptation and resiliency, and we have already spent a fair bit of time talking about adaptation and resiliency. That is essential. We can look at climate change as a challenge, or we can look at it as an opportunity to really think about how our communities look in the future with equity as our North Star, having communities that have more green and blue infrastructure, that are safer, and that are vibrant both from an environmental standpoint, but also from an economic standpoint. So I really see climate change as not just a challenge to overcome, but an opportunity that we can absolutely lean into. And I hope you'll join me in thinking of the changes that we want to put in front of you, that Chris is going to advocate for this legislative session. Those are incredible opportunities to build a better future.
Right, and before Chris starts, I'm not going to be quite so modest as Delegate Boyce was. The climate change laws are the work product of this committee, and we had input from everyone here, most especially, of course, the vice chair of the committee, Delegate Boyce, Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo is no longer with us. He's now on Economic Matters, and our Republican colleagues as well when it came to many of the business aspects of the bill, several of whom are no longer with us today. And I could mention every member of my committee who was here last year. I'm not going to do that, though, but it is the work product of this committee. We are very invested in its success, and we look forward to working with all of you on this as well. So, Chris, if you want to take it from there.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about it. I'd like to recognize a couple of members of the Climate Change Commission who are here. First, Vice Chair Stein, thank you for your leadership. Vice Chair Stein is the member of the House of Delegates on the commission. We're also joined by one of the co-chairs of the commission, Kim Coble, Legal Conservation Voters. I believe that's everyone except for, of course, our secretary, who is the chair of the Climate Change Commission. Congratulations on that. So I'll talk just a little bit about the commission, what it is, what it does, and then I'll highlight some of the most recent recommendations for General Assembly action from the Climate Change Commission in the annual report issued 2 months ago. So first, the purpose of the Climate Change Commission is to advise the Governor and General Assembly on ways to mitigate the causes of, prepare for, and adapt to the consequences of climate change. That's its general charge. It's been around for some time. It was originally established by executive order in 2007. In 2008, the Climate Change Commission produced the state's first climate action plan, and that led to, in 2009, the first Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act that established climate change targets for Maryland in state law. In 2014, the commission was reformed and expanded, again by executive order, and then in 2015, the General Assembly codified the commission into law, established its membership, established its purpose and function. Then most recently, last year, in the Climate Solutions Now Act that we were just hearing about, 4 additional working groups were added to the commission to complement the 4 working groups that the commission has had in years prior. So the membership, there are 27 members of the Climate Change Commission. This is not including the numerous participants on its working groups. And it's a diverse set from state government, local government. On the state government side, it's both agencies and the legislature, industry, nonprofits, science community, university system, et cetera. There are lots of different types of members. There are standing members, for example, the Secretary of the Environment. There are members appointed by the governor, members appointed by the Senate President and the House Speaker, members appointed by local government and by particular nonprofit representatives. The commission meets generally quarterly, and all of its work every year leads up to an annual report where it makes recommendations for state action. Highlighting the leadership here, under the law, the Secretary of the Environment is the chair of the commission. Though they can designate someone else. So Secretary McElwain is the chair of the Climate Change Commission. Traditionally, there have been co-chairs from both the private sector and from the environmental NGO community. So those 2 co-chairs are Ann Lindner from PEPCO and Kim Coble from Legal Conservation Voters. The commission added a 3rd chair recently to specifically drive environmental justice through all of the commission's work, and selected Charmaine Brown, who's a seasoned executive working on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice for organizations. Under the commission law, MDE and the Department of Natural Resources staff the commission. It also receives substantial staff support from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. So on that climate justice approach that the commission established a few years ago, co-chair Charmaine Brown leads a climate justice team, which is sort of populated with representatives from the working groups. And their job is to examine everything that the commission does and everything the commission proposes with an equity lens. And it has a series of questions shown here to ensure that the commission is pursuing not just our climate change objectives, but pursuing them in a way that advances climate justice and environmental justice. Next slide. So the Climate Solutions Now Act passed last year set the most ambitious greenhouse gas reduction targets of any state law in the country. Requiring a 60% reduction in statewide greenhouse gas emissions. The greenhouse gases are the air pollutants that cause climate change. Requiring a 60% reduction in the rate of those pollutants by 2031. That's compared to 2006. That is Maryland's longstanding baseline year. It further established a longer-term goal of reaching net zero across Maryland's economy by 2045. Now, the law tasks MDE with writing the plan. So MDE has to produce the plan for the state to achieve that. However, we do that in close work with our partner agencies as well as the Climate Change Commission. We try to work as much of the process as we can through the Climate Change Commission and incorporate the Climate Change Commission's recommendations in the plan. So I mentioned the Climate Change Commission had 4 working groups. I'm going to talk very briefly about each of them. These are the existing working groups, not the new ones. The first is adaptation and resilience. The second is education, communication, and outreach. The third is greenhouse gas mitigation. And the fourth is scientific and technical. A little bit about each of those one by one. I'm not going to read all of this information, but hopefully this presentation can be a resource. The first, the Adaptation and Resilience Working Group. It is chaired by traditionally by the Secretary of Natural Resources, which is now Josh Kurtz. Secretary Kurtz has been working on the Climate Change Commission and its working groups for some time, so we're excited that he's going to be taking the reins on ARWG. And it generally takes a look at how to prepare for the impacts of climate change that we know are happening and help the state become more resilient to those impacts. The second one, Scientific and Technical Working Group, it's chaired by Dr. Peter Goodwin, who's the president of the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, who is also a standing member of the commission. And it's an assembly of scientists from throughout Maryland, from throughout the universities, and they ensure that the commission is always working based on the latest science. They provide regular scientific updates to the commission and also help to explore ways that that science can be translated into policy. Next slide, the Greenhouse Gas Mitigation Working Group also traditionally has two co-chairs, one representing the private sector and one representing the environmental NGOs. Those two co-chairs are Mike Powell from Gordon Feinblatt for the business community side, and Kim Coble pulling double duty as a working group co-chair as well in the League of Conservation Voters. And this is the working group that focuses on how do we reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Maryland in order to mitigate climate change and meet our statewide goals. And then there's an Education, Communication, and Outreach Working Group co-chaired by communications professionals. Amy Lambert from EA Engineering and Jabari Walker from Bowie State are the current co-chairs. And it performs outreach and awareness on behalf of the commission. So it explains what the commission is doing, what the commission has recommended, and helps citizens and businesses understand what they can do and should do to address climate change. So the legislation last year created 4 new working groups and established those working groups' membership. And for each working group, it has there is some sort of a deliverable this year, a study on a topic or a set of recommendations on a topic. Each of these working groups has a charge related to its title. There's one that's about just transition, employment, and retraining, one about energy industry revitalization, one about energy resilience and efficiency, and one about solar photovoltaic system recovery, reuse, and recycling. MDE is currently building these new working groups. There are lots of appointments that need to be made to get the working groups up and running and working toward the products they're going to deliver this year. Next slide, please. So the commission produces an annual report every year since the commission law was passed, and this is where the commission makes recommendations for the state to take action. Some of those recommendations are for the governor to do something. Some are for the General Assembly to pass legislation. Some are for state agencies to take actions or for MDE to issue regulations. Some of those are recommendations for the university system to prioritize particular scientific objectives, etc. It takes a very broad view and it's very prolific, and it gathers all of these recommendations into an annual report. So the rest of the presentation is a lot of recommendations. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but we've pulled together all the recommendations the commission made for the General Assembly to act in its most recent report. So this is hopefully a helpful resource for you all. I'll just highlight one or two on each of these slides so you can get an idea of the breadth of action that the commission is calling for. So the scientists recommended the development of a new fund to fund innovation to help promising new technologies get deployed more quickly. The Education and Communication and Outreach Working Group recommended funding a statewide climate awareness campaign so that local governments, businesses, and Marylanders can understand what resources are available to them to take action on climate, especially the new federal resources from all the recent federal legislation. And then the Greenhouse Gas Mitigation Working Group had a comprehensive set of recommendations for policy action in various sectors of the economy. And I've listed them all here as reading assignment for everyone in the room later on, but just some of the highlights. We have it's more challenging to drive an electric vehicle if you live in multi-unit housing because you don't have a driveway, you may not have it anywhere dedicated to park it. So the Climate Change Commission recognized that that's a challenge that the state can help overcome by providing funding for electric vehicle charging infrastructure in multi-dwelling buildings. And we've already seen some legislation on that topic be proposed. In the arena of clean energy and energy efficiency, one of the major challenges the state faces is that the pace of solar energy deployment has not kept up with what we need to achieve our climate change goals generally, and also our renewable energy goals to the Renewable Portfolio Standard, a challenge that everyone in this room is familiar with. So the Climate Change Commission looked at a lot of potential opportunities to clear some of the bottlenecks and roadblocks. So there's a lengthy list of recommendations for actions just oriented towards getting more solar energy deployed faster. On the next slide, there were a number of actions recommended to facilitate building decarbonization, one of which is building upon the Public Service Commission's recommendations that it made to the General Assembly for reforming the Empower Maryland program that were required by another law several years ago, to help orient the Empower Maryland program to more effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions as an additional objective beyond reducing electricity consumption. So that gives a flavor of the sort of task ahead. In order to meet our new climate change goals, we have to do many, many, many different things. The Commission has pulled together some of those things, a large number, but there are even many more that we need to do. And so the Commission is a really important resource to guide the state's efforts to identify high priority actions and the sort of scale of action that's necessary to meet the challenge that we face. The presentation also includes additional reference information about the working groups and about membership that you may find helpful. Looking forward to questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great to see you all, Madam Secretary. Great to see you. We bonded, for the benefit of the rest of the committee, we bonded over taking COVID tests at the same time at an event about a week ago. We both passed, so I feel like hopefully that's a good omen for the future. But good to see you. I really could not be more excited about you coming on board.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple questions. One is related to sort of the recommendations for policymakers. I know that the administration just made headlines for allocating $500 million to transit projects broadly, and I think that money, my understanding, can be used for a variety of different ones. And so in that vein, I was wondering why there seems to be a notable omission in the recommendations in the annual report around sort of large-scale rail or bus transit. I know there's sort of micro transit mentioned, and there is commuter, benefits mentioned, a lot of pedestrian stuff, all good stuff. I like it all. But just wondering if there was a consideration of trying to recommend to the governor or policymakers to make more robust investments in transit as a way to curb greenhouse gas emissions.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely. The Commission doesn't tend to weigh in on specific projects, right? But there was one general recommendation that the governor divert a greater share of transportation spending on transit. And so it's encouraging to see that that's already been acted upon. But the Commission does, it's always a challenge to say at what level of detail does it dig in on a particular topic. But yeah, definitely directionally it's consistent with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then this one, I have to admit, is a little bit self-serving, but I know there have been a number of bills that have rattled around the State House for years around the Renewable Portfolio Standard and what gets Tier 1 or Tier 2 funding sources. And I know that historically that MDE has not necessarily weighed in one way or another on different proposals in the General Assembly to put more subsidies toward this type of source or phase out this type of source. And I was wondering if that is something that you all might consider in the new administration to weigh in on those types of proposals, or if there have been any internal, that's kind of two words that are tricky to string together, any internal discussions on that issue.
Well, we definitely plan to address that in the new administration. I don't know if you have particulars on it now, but that's for sure. That's something that we're looking into.
Okay, awesome. Thank you all very much. And again, really excited.
Thank you.
Okay, next question goes to the Vice Chair of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for the presentation about the excellent work of the Climate Change Commission. And I must say that I did not, as a commission member, I did not contribute a whole lot last year. Hope to contribute more moving forward, but I understand and very much appreciate.
You were pretty busy on climate issues, weren't you?
Yes, earlier in the year, yes. Yeah. But I very much appreciate the tremendous amount of work that goes into the work of the commission, the different work groups, and the preparation of the report every year. It's very, very impressive. I've got a Couple questions. First, I know that, the recommendations in the report reflect the fact that we've made a lot of progress. We've set goals that are challenging to achieve, net zero by 2045, 60% by 2031. And so therefore, the Commission has numerous recommendations, especially on the mitigation side. Is it possible, with respect to the ones that would require General Assembly action, is it possible to prioritize them? To say that, yes, at the top of the list is rapidly accelerating the deployment of zero-emission vehicles. So is that, to the extent that you could say some go to the top of the list, would you be able to do that?
Sure, yes, happy to. And the Commission, especially the mitigation working group over the course of the year, has sort of identified the high priority areas. And increasing the deployment of zero-emission vehicles is definitely one of them. Also, increasing the pace of solar energy deployment is another. Those two are absolutely crucial, and those are two areas where MDE identified in a progress report that we issued last year as critical areas where we need to move faster.
Speaking a little out of turn because I haven't been here and been a part of the commission yet, I would like to just highlight that looking at the Climate Solutions Now Act, these recommendations, some of them, a lot of them look the same to me, but I would need to look and see with the commission, prioritize it based on what's expected of us, right? And so I just wanted to highlight that. I would like to meet and really have a discussion on prioritizing them based on the Climate Solutions Act.
Sure. No, thank you. And my second question is, could you discuss at this point if the new administration is taking a look at California's advanced clean cars, I think it's Clean Cars 2 rule, and what the timeline for consideration for Maryland's adoption of that would be?
The timeline, and I know you probably don't want me to speak more on it, but I'm going to. I'll just, I think the timeline, unfortunately, because we allowed us to kind of expire ourselves out of it. But I'm thinking next year, September, we should be, I'm hoping, much further with it. I can't say too much. I'm going to turn it over to you. Don't worry. But there is an issue with the fact that it gapped. We have this gap year now. But I'm hoping by September. Please, you can correct me too if you want.
That's right. I hope so. We are, of course, required to participate in the program by the Clean Cars Act. And so it requires regulatory action by MDE. And typically, a smooth regulatory action takes about 9 months. On the air side, so that could potentially put us in the neighborhood of September. But we can talk more and get a more specific update.
Okay, if I could just ask if when there is an update about timeline for consideration of that issue, if you could let us know, that would be great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next question goes to Delegate Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very impressed with all of this. It really looks very good. I have one question. It's really looking down the road after all of this is implemented and we have everything is electric cars and we have solar panels everywhere they can go. We will have an issue about how to dispose of them when they expire their natural life of service, and there's components in them that may be tricky to dispose of. And I wondered if you have a plan or you have a plan for a plan to come up with how to deal with all of these things that really aren't a big issue right now. But I was here when we started talking about how are we going to get rid of the light bulbs, and they were going to last 10 years, and then they got replaced by a whole new technology before 10 years was up. So that would be a good question for you if you're looking at it. You have a plan for a plan?
I'm happy to. Yeah,
go please.
In the Climate Solutions Now Act last year, tasked us with establishing a working group to specifically look at solar photovoltaic system recovery, reuse, and recycling to get out ahead of that issue that will be a good problem to have some time from now because it means we've built a lot of solar energy now. And so definitely there's a plan for a plan to get out ahead of that. And that working group is specifically tasked with saying, what do we need to prepare for now so that we're ready for that new waste stream that may emerge in the future?
What about these batteries?
Yeah.
So we've heard about that if, they catch fire on a ship somewhere and they can't put the fire out, and all of these other issues.
That's right, and so they will also have to be managed at end of life and potentially recycled. And so that's also another area where we need to look to in the future, where when we move beyond just 1% of the vehicles on the road being electric to hopefully a much larger percentage very soon, those vehicles will also cycle out and the batteries will need to be addressed.
I was just saying, in California, we had to do the same thing and look at the end of life of batteries. And it's going to take a partnership and working with the automotive industry together and really getting to the bottom of who's responsible, who wants, honestly, sometimes the automakers want those batteries back for recycling purposes, or they want to be responsible. So it's a larger partnership, I think, that we need to look into. Again, I'm speaking a little out of turn because I'm not sure what we, this commission have talked about in terms of that, but that's my experience coming in. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wondered if you could speak a little bit more about what your recommendations are regarding the Empower program, a little more about that.
Sure thing. So the report goes into more detail, and the Climate Change Commission's website is mde.maryland.gov/MCCC for Maryland Commission on Climate Change. So I'd encourage you to look at the report. There were recommended reforms to focus on greenhouse gas emissions. That is already addressed, at least in part, in recent legislation, to broaden the goal of the Empower Maryland program beyond reducing electricity consumption to reducing greenhouse gas emissions as complementary objectives, and to ensure that the program is working well for low-income customers, which is a challenge. Broadly speaking, the recommendations are in those two areas, but the Public Service Commission has also issued detailed recommendations that the Climate Change Commission reaffirmed.
Thank you, and I apologize that I have not read the PSC recommendations, but is it something you can briefly summarize what their recommendations are?
Yeah, so they were in the vein of how to orient the program effectively towards greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but beyond that, we'd be happy to provide more information, and of course the Public Service Commission as well.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, never mind.
Secretary, welcome to the Environment and Transportation Committee. We're very interested in working closely with you and, of course, also with our colleagues in the new EEE committee, or whatever they're calling it, the E-cubed committee, which I understand is going to have a lot of the subject matter. And, of course, we worked very closely with C.T. Wilson and the Economic Matters Committee last year when we pulled together the legislation for the state of Maryland. So you're free to go. And
thank you.
Do we have any announcements from subcommittee chairs? If not, I have an announcement, and that is that I'd like to see all my subcommittee chairs and the ranking minority leader in the conference room at 3:15. Okay, we're dismissed.